James Calvin Boren. James Calvin Boren was the son of William Henry Boren and Mary Boutwell Drummond. His mother's parents were Henry Drummond and Mary Boutwell Taliaferro. The children of William Henry Boren, and Mary Drummond were, it is said the older children were born in Amherst County, Virginia. James Calvin Boren, Martha Catherine Sester, Isabella Boren, Richard Ramsey, Zachariah Drummond Boren, Harriet E. Stanford, Mary Virginia McKinney, Mary Ellen Boren, Solomon Keith, Elmer Boren, Emily Boren, Andrew Jackson Daniel Thompson, Edward Charles P. Boren, Nancy Jane Goodall, William Lankford Boren, Elmia Shelton, Virginia Boren, Newton Murray, Harriet Boren, and Martha Boren. William Henry and Mary Drummond Boren were found in Osage County in the census of 1850. By 1860, William must have been deceased, and Mary was living with their son, Zachariah, in Miller County. She was listed as Mary B. Keith. In 1858, Mary B. Boren married John Keith in Miller County. At this time, I do not know who John Keith was. There was a John Keith, born 1827, who married Catherine J. Whittle in 1860. They were living in Richward Township with 6 children, ages 1 through 12. This is surely not the same John Keith who married Mary B. Boren in 1858. In the Pulaski County census of 1860, James Boren and his wife, Martha Catherine Sester, were living in the Hawkeye area of the Northwest Taverns Township near the Miller County boundary line. Some of their neighbors included the families of Sester, Wall, Smith, Shelton, Thornton, Luttrell, Reynolds, McDowell, Stewart, and Glover. In the Pulaski County census of 1860, James Boren and his wife, Martha Catherine Sester, were living in the Hawkeye area of the Northwest Tavern Township near the Miller County boundary line. Some of their neighbors included the families of, I just read that. In 1983, I had the privilege of interviewing one of the area's oldest citizens, Height Boren of Hawkeye in Pulaski County. That's Danny's great-grandpa. At the time, he was in his 100th year, and he lived for another 2 years after my interview. I had such a pleasure visiting and speaking with Uncle Height Boren of Hawkeye. He is a marvelous old gentleman who celebrated his 100th birthday in February of this year, 1983. He lives alone in his little home in Hawkeye and gets around remarkably well. His eyesight is nearly gone, but his other senses are so keen. His memory is like a computer that has stored facts and dates in a memory bank that can be tapped with just a little persuasion. Let me tell you his wonderful family history as he told it to me and his 100 years of life. James Height Boren was born just a short distance from where he lives in February 1883. He was one of 13 children born to James and Catherine Sester Boren. His brothers and sisters were Manuel, Joseph, Joe, John, Scott, Charlie, Adam, Jane, Sarah, Sally, Martha, Eva, Hattie, and Lily. In 1904, at age 21, Height married Zelphia E. McDowell, daughter of William and Sarah Legion McDowell. The brothers and sisters of Zelphia were Calvin, John, Monroe, Frank, Sadie, Margaret, Mary Jane, and the twins Victoria and Alice Brumley. The parents of both Height and Zelphia came to Miller County in the mid-19th century from Georgia. Jim Boren, Height's father, was born and reared to manhood in Macon, Georgia. Height's mother, Catherine Sester, daughter of Manuel and Judy Sester, was born and reared in North Carolina. Jim, who was 26 years old, born in 1838, married Catherine, age 15, just before they started their trek up to Missouri in 1860. Jim and Catherine were among the large group of immigrants who journeyed here together from Georgia, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. The Borens and McDowells were accompanied by other families, including the Sesters, Steens, Lesions, and Russells. They came in a group of 45 wagons, which they called a wagon pack, and all settled in the same area of northern Pulaski and southern Miller counties. Height and Zelphia were parents of 3 children: Orville, who is deceased, Frank, who lives near his father and cares for him daily, and Pearl, Mrs. Homer Cochran. Zelphia passed on at the age of 82 in 1968. This wonderful couple celebrated 64 years of marriage before her death and shared many memories and many years of happiness as they welcomed newborn generations. Today, Height has 6 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and 4 great-great-grandchildren. Note, since 1983, I'm sure that number has increased. So Robert would be a great-great-great-grandson. I taped our conversation that evening when I visited Height. He told me he only attended school for about 2 years as a child because the times were rough and the children were needed on the farm. After marriage, he learned how to read and write, taught by his wife, whom he called a good scholar. His first job away from home was when he reached the age of 16. He worked 99 days for Charlie Condra, doing farm chores and field labor. As the years rolled along, he was a man of many trades, a farmer in Pulaski County, a harvest hand in Kansas, an employee of Hunter's Mill in Wellington, Kansas City, a rural mail carrier, a state prison employee in Missouri, and a laborer when Fort Leonard Wood was being constructed. His job as rural mail carrier in 1915 to 1919 during World War I must have been an interesting one. He carried the mail by team and wagon from Hawkeye to Crocker, Pulaski County. He and Ben McDowell were co-partners on this mail route. One week, Height would carry the mail and Ben would farm. The next week, vice versa. Height registered for the draft during World War I, but was never called. By this time, he was almost 35 years old, and the draft caught the younger men. When Height was a child, everyone called their elders either uncle, aunt, grandma, or grandpa. He quipped to me that he didn't realize his neighbors had other names until he was grown. That was a custom which has disappeared over the years, although when you speak to him, it seems only natural to call him Uncle Height, or perhaps Grandpa Height. His family raised sugar cane each year to make a large supply of molasses for themselves and their neighbors. In the gardens, they raised most of their year's food. One of the methods used to preserve food for the upcoming months was to use Mother Earth for storage. Cabbages were turned upside down. The potatoes and turnips were kept in deep holes dug in the earth and covered with straw and old sacks. They also raised pinto and white northern beans and black-eyed peas. The vegetables they picked were laying out in the sun to dry, and when the shells broke, the boughs and peas were ready to store in sacks. Height remembered Hawkeye was a busy little village over the many years that have passed by. There were several general stores and mercantiles in the town. Some of the storekeepers were Anderson Keith, Joe Whittle, my grandfather, great-grandfather, Fred Ferguson, Elijah Stretton, Jim Black Jim Wall, Albert Pemberton, and Jack Brumley. I've been on the Brumley Bridge before. That's scary. A blacksmith shop was owned by Fred and Jim Stone. Overstairs, over one of the stores, was a modern Woodman of American Hall, a civic organization of which Height was a member. He could remember several post offices operated by his area neighbors in various locations. The churches of Hawkeye have been the Christian Church Campbellite built in 1880, a Baptist church built on a hill about a half-mile down from Hawkeye, and later another Baptist church was constructed in the town. It is in use today, remodeled and renovated. As a child, Height could remember hearing fantastic eyewitness stories of the Civil War as experienced by the old soldiers who would gather at his father's house. On many Friday nights, these old veterans would get together and talk for hours of their memories through the years of the wars. They named these men who would share their memories at his father's house, and they included Squire John Ferguson, Wills Lively, Preacher Rudder, George Steen, Smith Holden, Tom Thornsberry, Will Pemberton, Thomas Day, Abner Long, Henry Carroll, John Carroll, John Lowery, Jim Smith, Bill Madden, Nicholas Long, Jack Long, Peter Whittle, Solomon Keith, Preacher Jack Thompson, Thomas Owen Workman, Old Man Hill, and Bill McDowell. See what I mean when I speak of his remarkable memory? GAR, which stands for Grand Army of the Republic, encampments were held every year at Richland, Crocker, Brumley, and Iberia. For 4 days, excitement would overflow at these encampments. Many families would come into towns in wagons and camp out during the 4 days of activities. Height told me the first encampment held at Iberia was located on the Irwin and Farnham farms outside of town. I had always assumed the encampments and picnics had been held at Old Hardy Park on the western edge of Iberia. He related so many other marvelous stories, but space does not permit me to write them all. I asked him for whom he voted for president the first time, but at the time he could not remember. He said it was in 1904 and he was a Republican, 'cause I've always voted the Republican ticket. Well, folks, the first president he voted for was none other than old Teddy Roosevelt, who was elected in the November general election of 1904. Height has always only owned one car in his life and refused to drive it on the highways. He preferred his trusted horse and would today if he could ride again. He also informed me that he has never ridden in a boat or an airplane, and what's more, he never will. Trains were a different story. He has ridden many and even tried hoboing the tracks to the Kansas wheat harvest as a young man. Needless to say, my visit and interview with Uncle Height Boren was such a wonderful experience. As this grand old man begins his second 100 years of life, I can only envy him in all those glorious memories of his first 100 years. He has lived through the most exciting time of world history. He began life on a frontier farm in the 1880s, saw the horseless carriage arrive. Then he witnessed the airplane soar across the skies. He saw electricity invented for our modern conveniences. and onward to a computerized age of space technology and man's first visit to the moon. I, too, have seen all these so-called modern-day miracles. But do you know what? I wish I could have sat around an open fireplace or campfire and heard all those tales of the Civil War by old soldiers as they gathered around the home of Jim Boren all those countless years ago. And that's my son's great, great, great grandfather from Missouri.